So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about who are we? Are we somebody or are we nobody? So I read a book one time in which the main character used to stand in front of the New York Library and look at the big doors with large lions situated on each side of the door, and he would want to go in, but he did not feel like he was worthy to go inside. He was 14 years old and intimidated by the outside of a library. He did not feel worthy. Now, this is a human experience for some of us. Some of us it's a library. Some of us it's church. Some of us it is not feeling worthy to go to school or to get married or to have children, or there's so many things that we can come up in our lives that we decide we're not worthy of. Each of those moments in which we see our inadequacies, our lack of worth, each of us comes on occasions a set of circumstances in which we can only feel that we do not belong, that here, in this time and place, we are nobody. Martin Luther King said it as well as he spoke of Black America. For years, the black man in America has been given a sense of nobodiness. Only now is he developing a sense of somebodiness. I think women often feel that way, especially in the church. The people called Israel faced just such a crisis in their own experience. The Old Testament, in depicting those crucial events of the Exodus, those days when Moses led them into the desert to seek their destiny, is quite realistic. The scripture reminds us that this was indeed a nondescript crew of people that followed Moses, and they were a group of slaves and free peoples, black, brown, and white. They were not an actual people at all, but they became a people only because of what God did in their midst. They were nobodies, but they became God's nobodies because they shared an experience of God's activity. They became somebody, and because God chose them and forged them into something, they moved out of their nobodiness. Remember this when faced with large church organizations. You are called and chosen as much as anyone that attends those large and megachurch large churches. So, Israel, to have an identity, as we would put it in our 20th century psychobabble, she had a massive identity crisis. She didn't know who she was, but now through God she knew who she was. By the time of the 8th century, however, before Christ, she had developed a strong heritage, a noble tradition. In her own eyes, she was a proud and worthy nation. But she had forgotten how she came to be, how her ancestors were the despised desert people whom other nations had regarded with scorn and fear. But now she was somebody. But in her midst, in the 8th century BC, came the prophet Hosea with a terrible and frightful image. Hosea was an intensely personal and emotional prophet. He drew on the deepest and most moving symbols at his command. The prophet describes at the beginning of his book how he sensed the Lord and was commanded to do a terrible thing, an unbelievable thing. So this is what God said to him in 1 Hosea and the 2nd verse. Adonai's opening words in speaking to Hosea were to instruct Hosea, "Go marry a whore and have children with this whore, and for the land is engaged in flagrant whoring away from Adonai." In other places in the book, they use the word prostituting because there were sacrificing to other idols. They were forgetting about who they were as a people in God's sight. So Hosea did it. He took his wife Gomer, the unfaithful and promiscuous Gomer, and Gomer bared his children. Children whose names were to be the living picture of the anger of God at his people. Now, when we name our children these days, we name it because we're naming them after people in our family, or we like what the name means, or we like the way it sounds. But these poor children. One of the children born to Hosea and Gomer is called Lo Ruhamah, no pity, no mercy. Can you imagine? A little girl running around the house and out in the streets, and every time you call her, you have to spit out the message of God's judgment. Come here, no mercy. Come in for supper, no mercy. With every mention of that child's name came the warning that all was not well between Israel and God. And then the son, and the Lord said, call his name Lo Ami, not my people. Call him nobody. And every time you see this boy in the streets of your city, you will be reminded that you are really nobody. Oh, you may have become accustomed to supposing that you are somebody, but actually you are nobody, not my people. A frightening prophecy, a graphic message that no one could miss. But Hosea went beyond the harshness of his own message. Hosea offered a word of hope beyond all this talk of judgment and anger. Hosea is always the prophet who sees both sides of God, who understands that when God is judgment, he is also in deep grief. So Hosea's word of hope: I will have pity on the house of Judah, and in the place where he was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, sons of the living God. You are nobodies, and don't you forget it, but you are God's nobodies, and you don't need to forget that either. Now watch what happens when we come to the New Testament. And we see writers struggling to describe what the church is. Look through the New Testament, from Jesus to Paul to Peter to James, and see how all of them pick up all the images and symbols used in the Old Testament to describe Israel. But now they're using them to describe the church. The church of Christ is the new Israel, the new people chosen of God. Once again, he has taken some nobodies and they made them into somebodies, the sort of somebodies best called God's nobodies. And look especially at our text in 1 Peter. Let's turn there. Two, 9 and 10. In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Before you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So we went from being nobodies out in the world, doing worldly things, to being somebody. Because Christ chose us. He chose us. We chose him too, but I don't think we would choose him if he didn't choose us first. Here the apostle quotes directly from Hosea. And he boldly transforms Hosea's ancient images to a new situation. Peter says of the church, you are now the people of God who were once not his people, outside his mercy. You have now received his mercy. Here is the early church, Jew and Gentile, learned and ignorant, free and slave, mostly poor, mostly the outcast elements of the first century world. Once no people at all, no identity at all, but now God's kind of nobodies. Once outside the concern of God, but now drawn together by an act of grace. Let's look at the kind of nobodies these people were to become. What exactly is the identity of the church? What does it mean to discover that suddenly you have beginning this kind of somebodyness? First, the Apostle Peter reminds us that God's nobodies became somebodies when they realize that they are different, that there is something special about them. To know that we are the people of God is to know that we have a special calling, a particular identity. So how many people do you know that when you start talking to them, I talk to a lot of people because I work in a hospital, so I see a lot of people. And we're in a kind of a casual thing. My people are not catastrophically ill, and they all like to talk. That's fine with me. I like to talk too. So, upon first meeting people, they tell me their name, generally. And then secondly, they may tell me something about where they work or that they're retired. But those people of God, they always identify themselves to me as people of God. It's part of their identity. And it doesn't matter if they're red, yellow, black, or white. Everyone will, if they are a person of God, will eventually let me know they are a person of God. It's not something I have to draw out of them. Of course, we live in the South, and in the South, we like our godly roots. So, it is a part of our identity. So think about that. You never hear anybody who's a Christian person say things like, well, I'm a nobody, or yeah, I don't have any particular affiliation with anybody. No, they're like, I'm a Christian. I go to church. So they have found their somebodyness. We are not just a part of a culture that we live. We are not to be reflections of the values and attitudes that prevail in the world around us. No, we have to choose. Those people who will tell you they're Christians, they chose. Something happened to us, and it was decisive. The set-apart spirit from Yeshua has invaded our lives. He has written his laws and commandments on our hearts, and he has made us into something new. Many people you can talk to will tell you how, oh, I used to do this and I used to do that. But then I found God. Well, really, he found you. But you found each other, and he made you a new person, and you're like, I don't do those things anymore. I have no desire for them. They're not important anymore. The story is told of the man whose job it was in the factory where he worked to always blow the noon whistle, precisely at 12 sharp. He was to pull the cord and sound the whistle, signaling the noon hour. This gentleman took his duty very seriously, so he always made it a point to stop by the jeweler's shop every morning and check his wristwatch against the elaborate and expensive clock mounted in the jeweler's window. Day after day he checked his watch in this manner, frequently moving it up a minute one day or back a minute the next. Then one day his curiosity got the better of him, and he entered the jeweler's store and he asked the jeweler, Where do you get your time signal for the clock? Do you call the Naval Observatory? Or do you check with Western Union? To which the jeweler replied, "Oh, I just set it every day by the noon whistle that blows down at the factory." The world expects signals and standards. And we only give a mirror image of what we see and hear. You see, sometimes our identity as the people of God gets very confused because we are listening to the wrong signals. We are still acting as if we're nobodies, and we have forgotten that we are God's nobodies. Our task is to move into the world with self-consciousness and with identity. The trouble is that you and I in the church of the 20th century America have some problems with this sort of identity. We are nobodies, like the boy at the New York Library. We do not sense the worth God has conferred to us and onto us. So we don't know what we're worth. We have trouble with this whole notion that we are Yeshua's nobodies. We have become the image of what our peers and our circumstances try to make us. If you're called a failure, stupid, forgetful, or ugly enough as a child, that is how you will see yourself. As often happens, any of y'all that remember Peanuts, Charlie Brown and Lucy do a good job of illustrating this dilemma. In one of the Peanut strips, Lucy is in her booth ready to dispense psychiatric advice at the pre-inflationary price of 5 cents. Charlie Brown calls Lucy's attention to the sky and says, "See that plane up there? It's filled with people who are all going someplace. That's what I'd like to do. Go off somewhere, someplace, and start a new life." Lucy responds, "Forget it, Charlie Brown. When you got off the plane, you would still be the same person you are." But Charlie Brown persists. "But maybe when I got to this new place, the people would like me better." But Lucy, true to her form, chills his hopes. "Only until they got to know you, Charlie Brown. Then you'd be right back where you started." Now, poor Charlie Brown, he gives it one more try. But maybe these new people would be more understanding. And Lucy ends the whole discussion with a note of finality. "People are people, Charlie Brown." Well, this is true and it's not true. How do we change not only the perception of other people, but our perception of ourselves? Because it is the same with us. Too often we believe, like Lucy, that people are people, that we're locked in. We find it too easy to believe that we are locked into our personal histories, that we are locked into our social situations, that we are locked into the financial limitations. We find 1,000 ways to excuse ourselves, to discount the possibility of being something new. We are all like Lucy. All too often we believe that we are nobodies, and despite what God has done in our lives, we persist in our strange pessimism. And yet, I do not find in his text in 1 Peter any qualifiers, any ifs, buts, or maybes. I only find the absolute insistence that we have been made into something new ourselves and our own resources, and we have no right to stand in the way of God and his desire to do something with us. I find here only a wide openness to the creation of God. We are a chosen race, and it doesn't have anything to do with our color of our skin. We are God's own people. But there is more to this business of being called God's nobodies. Our text in 1 Peter has another insight for us. There is something else special about being a person of God. Our situation is rather like the one that occurred in a small hospital out in Kansas. One evening during an electrical storm, the power failed, and all the electrical equipment in the hospital, of course, stopped working. There was only one immediate crisis. A man had been caught in the elevator, and he obviously had panicked. He began to scream and to pound on the door and to demand that someone get him free immediately. One of the nurses in the hospital tried to calm him by saying, You'll be all right in a moment, sir. Our maintenance man will be here soon, and he will get our auxiliary power system working. Just wait for the maintenance man." But from deep in the elevator shaft came the plaintive cry, "But I am the maintenance man." How easy it is for us to become self-contained. How easy for us to become part of the problem instead of part of the answer. And how trapped we feel when suddenly we discover there is a world in need, but we can't respond. We, the maintenance men, are in the stalled elevators ourselves. And since it seems firmly stalled, some of us just settle in for a kind of existence it offers us. It may not be very exciting, to live in a stalled elevator, but it can't be too dangerous either. Provided there's air to breathe and plenty of food to eat. After all, how many risks can you run in a stalled elevator? How many injuries can you sustain huddled in the corner of your own little room? I have kind of had this feeling before. For me, Sunday church was easy. Come and go as you please. And this doesn't just happen in Sunday church. I'm just talking about me. It happens in Sabbath churches too. You can go, there's no real commitments to anything or anyone, especially to Yeshua in these situations when you're in a huge church, or maybe you don't even go to church. But you don't have a responsibility in your head to Yeshua either. You can go through all the motions but not have any real connection. Does everyone conduct themselves like this in Sunday church? No, but it was my experience, as I said. It seemed that about the only people that were really committed was the choir. It is fun, especially if you like to sing. And then there's the potlucks. What's not to like? Good food and lots of it. You see, this is the part of our nobodiness too. The people of Yeshua have convinced ourselves that in our nobodiness, we're not really needed. The world that surrounds us ignores us, and we take that to mean that we are not needed and they don't need us. But if you live that way, you're admitting you're a nobody. In other words, not part of God's plan. That means that we're not witnessing, cheering, giving community. That makes us restless because we need to be moving in tempo with the redemptive activity of Yeshua. If you ignore him enough, he stops talking to you. And he stops pointing out where you could be a somebody. We are searching and we are experimenting because Yeshua has more truth out there for us than we have been able to comprehend. And I find this pretty much every time Bill speaks, that he pulls out something new for me to think about, to dwell on, to chew, all those things that the Bible says you should do on the Word. But we are to be bold and creative and innovative community because we belong to Yeshua and we are co-heirs. In legal terms, that means we are co-executors of our Father's estate. Today's Sabbath community needs to be more than anything else this active sense of being God's nobodies. And I fear more than anything else our everlasting temptation to do churchly housekeeping instead and call that being the church. How much more being the church, being the people of God, is it to get involved with the needs of the world around us than it is to spend our time talking to one another at fellowship? How much more of the church are we than the scattered world that we're in? When we gather on Sabbaths or in meetings, how much it says about our identity as nobodies, sheer nobodies, if we fail to touch men and women and heal them where they hurt. How absurd for us to suppose that we have nothing to give an anguished world. We are not nobodies. We are Yeshua's. And that makes us all the difference. Our resources in and of themselves may be limited, but He multiplies them into sufficiency. What are resources? The newsletter, YouTube, Rev Media messages, singing Yeshua's praises in our life to anyone. Anyone you can talk to or touch is somebody in your orbit to mention Yeshua to. Do you have to go through the whole plan of redemption? Why Sabbath church? Why food laws? No, just mention Him. God gave us a beautiful day today. God gave us the rain we needed. Jesus answered my prayer today. Oh, my feet don't hurt. Jesus helped my feet. They're not hurting today. Pick something out that He has blessed you with, because I have found that I can find almost one or two things every day that He blesses me with. And it may just be that I didn't get hit head on by the guy that I was coming to church today, and he's right in my lane heading straight for me. And there's cars in the other two lanes, like he thinks my lane is an access lane. But I didn't get hit, because He blessed me with that today, not getting hit head on. Doesn't have to be long and flowery. Anything you can say about what He's done for you that day, that week, that year, anything that pertains to what you're doing. And when you choose to be positive, smile and speak of His goodness. You never know who you might have influenced into a thoughtful moment or a better day. Be Yeshua somebody today when you interact with strangers. Not only will you give a positive vibe, you feed yourself in that positive vibe. And you will truly be Yeshua's somebody.